Evening, darlings. So I'm so excited tonight to be doing yet another cooking episode with you all. I had a few of you actually request for me to do sort of another one, and so I was just so excited to do another one. And I was thinking tonight of doing something that actually calls for wine, because of course, why not, darlings? It just makes everything so much better, don't you think? So, yes, I'm going to continue to have my hair tied back. I'll probably throw my locks back as well. I know someone was a little bit upset that my hair was so free-flowing in the kitchen. But you know, it's supposedly very good for your health to have a hair of an elf in your food. It's supposed to be good luck. And also, we don't lose our hair almost ever. I think it takes something like 80 years for us to lose a single hair, so we almost never lose any hair, darling. It's not like they get anywhere or ever fall out, so no worries. But just for you to be feeling at ease, darling, I will... I've already got it tied back, but I will put these behind me as well, even though it's such a pain, but I do it for you, darlings. So this is sort of my own personal take on Vinen Kebap, which is sort of a Bulgarian sort of beef stew, I suppose you could call it, which is cooked with wine. And so I tend to add a little more vegetable to it, just because, darlings, I'm just so much more into adding more and more vegetables to everything. So I have my pot here, which is what everything is going to be cooked in, the same thing. It is good to sort of brown your meat sort of separately, but I find if you do it in the same pot, the flavors are much nicer, and of course that's usually what you do. Now, my pot isn't incredibly large, because they're almost impossible to find large pots in this country. So unfortunately, this is rather small. Usually you want to have one of those big sort of soup stock pots to just sort of give you enough space to do it. So we're going to go ahead now and start just by showing you the ingredients, and then we'll sort of talk about them. So you want 2 to 3 large yellow onions, or you can just do sort of new onions if you have them. I have a new onion and a yellow onion. I'm adding potatoes, although it doesn't call for them, and because of that I'm only using a single carrot instead of 2. You want your fresh parsley. I'm also adding a little bit of asparagus and some maitake mushrooms, although portobello would work as well. Again, I'm just adding more mushrooms. And then tomatoes. Usually use tomato paste, but I actually prefer the flavor that the fresh tomato gives it. And then I have my beef. I want to keep it as cold as possible, but I do have that. And then, of course, you need a bottle of wine, some bay leaves, and a bunch of other spices that we'll get to as we go. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and sort of just chop up all of the vegetables, because everything's going to start going rather quickly when it goes, and then it's going to sit for a very long time. It's a slow cooking process, and of course, if you have sort of a pressure cooker or something that will slow cook things, you can certainly, once you've sort of browned your meat and caramelized your onions and carrots and all that has softened, you can just throw it into the crock pot, I think they're called. A lot of rice cookers also have that sort of setting, the slow cook setting, and you can feel free to use that as well. I've done it before, but I'm actually making rice in the rice cooker. Usually you serve it either on rice or pasta's also quite good with this as well. So we're going to go ahead now and give everything a bit of a chop, and then we'll show you again sort of what's going on. So in a moment, darling, let's talk about the trick to mincing onions, because of course that's what we're going to need here. So start by just cutting your onion in half and setting your halves down. Now this is going to be similar actually to the technique we used last time, except I don't want you to cut all the way through. You just want to cut just about to here, and you're going to be going at diagonal angles all across. So you just sort of slice into it like so. Some of them may go a little farther than you intend, and that's of course fine as well. but you just want to make sure that you're getting it through enough that we can make this a little faster. So once you've done that, it's cut all the way across like that, you're going to cut this way now, and this is going to, in fact, come out as a mince. And it's just that simple. I've done rather a large mince, not sort of a very fine one, just because I like a little bit more of the flavor of the onions to sort of remain. But of course you can feel free to go ahead and give it a very fine mince as well. The ends will sometimes not cut through all the way, but it's very few of them, and you can just go through with a single cut and fix that problem for yourselves. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of finger work, which, you know, I'm known for being quite good at. So there we are. For the potato, I like to do it into 4 sections going this way, and we'll cut out any of the eye spots that are sort of there, and then you'll turn it over. Okay, let's do one at a time. Go through. Turn it again. And then there we go. All nice and bite-sized. Alright, so we're just going to finish cutting up the onion now. And then we'll go ahead and start heating up the oil in the pan. So go ahead, darlings, and put your heat up to medium-high, and get out either your canola or your olive oil. I'm going to use a little bit of both, about 2 tablespoons, so I'm doing roughly a tablespoon of each here. And make sure, of course, that your pan or your pot is fully coated on the bottom. Unless, of course, you have sort of the non-stick that don't require that. So we're going to, as soon as this is hot, go ahead and I'm going to drop in the meat. So the meat that I bought, I actually bought it pre-cut. You just want it to be cubed. It doesn't really have to be anything fancy. It is quite expensive actually here to buy beef. Actually, even sometimes chicken is a little expensive. But you're looking for sort of just something about the size of your thumb, from knuckle to tip, as far as sizing goes. So we're going to go ahead, the oil is quite hot now, and we're going to just drop in all of this beautiful beef. Now you want to make sure that it's cooked on all sides, browned on all sides. Now what the high heat is going to give you is it's going to keep the moisture in. So you want to give a very good sear on all sides as quickly as possible, which is why you have the higher heat. And then all of the moisture from the beef will be sealed inside, because otherwise it gets quite dry, especially with the longer cooking time. You can see the one side is already browned and the other side is going. You want to make sure you get all of the 6 sides of the cube. So we're just going to give them a flip as they get brown. It looks like it's about time for that now. And you'll just turn them over as you can. Now that we have a good sear on all sides, I'm going to go ahead and add my onion. And I am going to turn the heat down. So it should be about medium-low now. And what's going to happen as this cooks is all of the fat that's already in the beef is going to go and sort of get into your onion. You also want to go ahead and add your potatoes. So we have our cut potato here. I'm going to go ahead and add that. And then the last ingredient is actually grated carrot. You can sort of just go ahead and do a mince on it as well. Either one works perfectly fine. If you don't have sort of a mandolin or julienning mincer, then it's a little bit harder. But for me to grate this, and you can just do it with a cheese grater as well, you just sort of, it's a very long process, so we'll cut the amount of time it takes. The mandolins particularly go fast, so you really should be careful. And if there is a hand guard on yours, I highly recommend that you use it, because the blades are incredibly sharp. It goes very quickly, but you do sort of risk taking the skin off the tip of your fingers. And I've known quite a few people who have done that, and it's not fun to have to rush to the emergency room to get the first few layers of dermis reattached, just because you were looking away from what you were doing for a moment. Alright, so we're almost done now with grating this carrot up, and as soon as that's done, we're going to go ahead and start working on the mushrooms. And the mushrooms don't take very long, and the asparagus even less time, so they're going to go in as sort of the last. You see that this sort of fine grating that you get, it's much finer than sort of chopping it will be. Of course, you can just sort of give it a little bit of a mince. You'll notice there's a lot of liquid now. This is mostly coming out of the beef, so see, this is why you want to make sure you seal it, otherwise you lose all of it. Some of it is coming from the potatoes and a little bit from the carrots, but most of that is just the liquid coming out of the beef, because I didn't have my heat high enough, which you can tell from sort of the lighter color on the side of a couple of these pieces of beef here. So as soon as you've got all that covered, you also want to make sure everything is well salted and a little bit of pepper inside as well. So I sort of didn't show it, but you should also do it with the meat. So I'm a little out of it. I haven't had very much to drink this evening. It's sort of affecting me, I think, so let's solve that. Much better. So now we've got, in the pot, we've got the onions, the carrots, the potatoes, and of course our beef. You want to make sure your lid is on whenever you're not actively putting something in or stirring the pot, because of course every time you open it you're losing that moisture, and you really want to make sure that your beef isn't going to be getting sort of dried out unless you're planning on cooking it an incredibly long amount of time, so that it just rehydrates from the broth itself. So what we're doing now, speaking of broth, is we actually are going to start preparing the broth. So you need to have 2 cups of either meat or vegetable stock. I'm using an instant just because, well darling, I don't have time in this video to also show you how to make from scratch, and there's some wonderful broths. I usually tend to use a homemade mushroom broth, but we just don't have time to do that on the program today, so perhaps next time I can sort of show you how to do it, and it's very lovely with a touch of brandy or white wine in it as well. So we'll go on to that in another episode, but for now we're just using a little instant, which is quite simple. So we're going to go ahead now and add the broth. If you're using tomato paste, you want to make sure that you add it at the same time. If you're doing fresh tomatoes, I suggest more of a Roma or something that's a good sauce tomato, but unfortunately the store only had cherry today, so we're going to do that. If you're using sort of a Roma or other large tomato, you want to dice it, very similarly to how you saw the potatoes earlier. But since we'll be working with the cherry tomatoes, just sort of in half. You can do quarter if you're feeling really ambitious, but just half is fine. And then I tend to just throw them in with into the broth container, or just sort of in at the same time. You want to make sure you have 2 cups of broth available, and sort of at least a pint's worth of tomato on hand. If you're doing tomato paste, you want to make sure it's one of the smaller size containers, otherwise it's just going to sort of overpower the other flavors, especially since a lot of the tomato paste out there can sort of leave a bitter flavor if there's too much of it in there, and you sort of want to avoid that because since you're already adding wine, which sort of has a sharp flavor as it is a little bit sourness, you really don't want to sort of go towards the acidity any further than you already are. So we're going to go ahead now, and I'm going to add in my broth and also the additional tomato. There we go. And give it a quick stir, and then make sure that it's up at least to a medium heat. If you turned it down to sort of slow your cooking process a little bit, you can go ahead and do that, and then cover it back up immediately, darlings, immediately. So with that already in, the broth is going now, it's sort of heating up. You can make it hot and add it that way. If not, you want to sort of let it warm up a little bit. This is the point where I'm going to go ahead and add the mushrooms. The other things you need to be making sure you're adding is you want 2 bay leaves. Let's fish a couple out here. You want to put in a good amount of allspice. I'd say typically about half of a tablespoon, but you can do as little as a teaspoon if you prefer. I sort of prefer a lot of the allspice myself. And then you want to use either a mix of peppers or just, I have sort of this mixed pepper grinder that has both the white and black peppercorns, but there are mixes with even more. And then I like to also add a dash of either paprika or chili powder just to give it a little bit more of a sort of a warm, smoky flavor. Okay, and then give it a quick stir. Yes, that's smelling quite nice. Just to make sure all the spices are in there and working their magic on the broth. And then one thing I actually just remembered I forgot, and that's paprika. You need to add half of a tablespoon of paprika to this broth. Otherwise, you won't have the right flavor. I'm really just so out of it tonight, darlings. I'm so sorry. So we're going to go back now to the mushrooms, and it doesn't really matter so much about the size, since they're just sort of going to break down. I'd sort of make them not too large. You want them to be easy enough to eat with a spoon. So something more or less bite size is good, but you don't have to go quite as crazy as you have to go with some of the root vegetables, you know. If you have a piece sort of this size, which is about half the size of my thumb, that's sort of alright too. Okay, so let's go ahead and add those. I'm trying to make sure all the condensation that's getting trapped on the lid does go back in, because of course we're trying to retain moisture at this point. Now, we will start to be trying to heat things up and to sort of allow the moisture to evaporate on its own, but we want to do it in a way where it is softening and steaming as much of our food as possible. And you want actually for the moisture to get absorbed more than you want it to sort of evaporate. So let's give this, needs a little bit more salt, I think. Just a little bit. Such a good flavor. The smell of this, by the way, is absolutely wonderful. My neighbors are very private people, as am I. But when I ran into one of them in the hallway the last time I made this, they asked me what I had been cooking because it smelled so good. So be prepared for compliments, at least about the aroma of cooking this dish. So let's go ahead and let that sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, just sort of until it comes up to a low boil. You don't want a rolling boil or you'll sort of destroy the flavors that you're creating, but you want it just to slowly come up to a low boil. Darling, so you can see that it's now at this low boil. So everything's added now, and we're actually going to turn the heat down to low and let it simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes. You want to stir occasionally. If it sounds like it's starting to come up to a full boil, you definitely don't want that again because it's going to destroy a delicate flavor palette that we really want to preserve as well as possible. So at this point, it's just sort of go, relax, and just keep your ear out for the sounds of the stew. Alright, darling, so it's been about 25 minutes, so we need to start getting prepared for the next step while the pot is sort of finishing up. So the next thing we're doing is we're going to be combining our wine with a little bit of flour. So you're going to need 1 cup or 200 milliliters of red wine. A full-bodied red wine is better. So you're just going to add to that, sort of whisk into it, about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half of flour. So I have my flour here, and we're going to go ahead now. I like to add the flour first. It's a little bit easier that way, I think. Here's my tablespoon. Go ahead and put it in there. I like to have it already in the measuring cup. It's a little bit easier to sort of deal with when you're mixing it that way. And because it's such a small thing, just a fork will do. I like to give the flour a stir. This is to sort of help prevent some of the clumping that occurs. You don't need to actually put it through a sifter, although of course that makes it easier. But I find just a quick spin with the fork does about the same. And then we'll go ahead and add the red wine. Now, there's an interesting color changing process that things are going to start sort of undertaking. So I'll move this a little forward so you can sort of see the change. Right now, it's sort of a dark red color, but it will turn sort of a dull, sort of muddy pink color as we go. Actually, it matches my outfit fairly perfectly, don't you think, darlings? So you want to make sure all of the flour has been dissolved into your wine. Just going to give this a little bit of a stir. So it's actually quite good exercise, having to stir all of this. And then I like to, because sometimes what happens, and it's happened here to us today, you see there's sort of some flour that gets sort of trapped here along the edge. So you want to make sure that you're getting all of that off, and no one is getting left out of the celebration. Just as a note, if you leave this wine mixture for any period of time, what's going to happen is those flour particles will sort of settle down towards the bottom. Just give it a quick stir and everything will mix right back up again for you. And you'll know it's happened because the color will get darker, more like your wine originally was, and less of that little muddy pink. But just when you give it a stir, you'll see that it will immediately go back to the color it was. The other thing I want to do, because as soon as we've gotten the wine put in, you're almost done at that point. You do need to let it go about 10 to 20 minutes just to sort of uncover, to let excess moisture evaporate. The wine at that point is more of a flavoring. It's sort of a wine gravy that you've made, darlings, if you want the honest truth, except without the animal fats there. So there's two things that we still have to add, which is the asparagus and the parsley. Now, I've heard sort of two ways of going about the parsley. One is you chop it up and you add it with the wine so that it's sort of the flavors of the parsley get really mixed in very well. I've also heard to add it after, when you're actually serving it, so that you have more of the flavor of the parsley itself, more of a fresh, crisp flavor, which is very nice as well. I sort of prefer the flavoring of the parsley itself going in, but what I do is I always save a sprig or two. So I just sort of take a little sprig like this and I set this aside, and that's what I use as sort of a garnish, and everything else is going to go in. So because it can take quite a bit of time to sort of mince up the parsley, we're going to go ahead now and we're going to just going to go ahead and chop it up. Now you'll notice that the color of these two is getting pretty similar. So we'll just stir, and as if by magic, pink again. Now, I'm not a big fan of the big crunch of the stem. Of course, if you're cooking it, it's not as big a deal, but I sort of try to cut off as much of that uselessness as possible. I know a lot of people like it, but I'm just a little more picky, I suppose. And then I just throw the rest of it right into the burnables. So once I've got all of the little heads here, I just lay them out and I just allow myself to picture people that I just don't want to have anything to do with. Now this is sort of a common technique of cutting. So you want to bring your knife across in sort of a rocking motion, like so, and then you'll bring it back across going the other way. And you just continue to go at it until everything is sort of very fine. And you have nothing but the little bits left over, sort of a confetti of herbs, if you will. And you can see it's quite fine. And what this does, in addition to making it sort of easier at this size to sort of work into your broth, what it does is part of what gives the herbs such a wonderful flavor is the oils within, and because you're chopping them so fine, they're releasing more of the natural oil to add into the flavor of your 35 minutes now, and you can see this line where it's actually been cooking down a little bit. We have a nice amount of broth here. It smells absolutely fantastic, if I do say so myself. And you can see now that all of the beef has been cooked. You want to make sure that that is certainly the case before you sort of go on to the end game of things, as you might say. So we're going to go ahead now and add our wine mixture here. So let me give that another quick stir. Actually take an up-close look at the color change. Oh, lovely. Back to that nice ruddy pink. So now we're going to go up and just go ahead and pour all of that in. Oh, delicious. It looks so good, doesn't it, darlings? And now you have this beautiful little color, and we're just going to sort of mix that right in. And now we'll be leaving this to cook uncovered for another 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully to bring down a little bit of the excess liquid before we add our parsley. Now at this point, if you are going to do the asparagus, I suggest you go ahead and chop it, and we'll throw that. So we're going to go ahead and turn the heat up to the medium again. And we're going to go ahead. I forgot to wash the asparagus. Very naughty of me. So we'll snap the ends off of that. And then we'll go ahead. So you want about 2 centimeters for each cut on the asparagus. It doesn't have to be too much. And the heads you can just leave entirely whole. You know, they're quite tender and delicious that way. And then just go ahead and throw them in. Asparagus cooks so quickly, you really don't need it to be in for any period of time before things are just about done. So let it stir in. We only have about 2 more minutes also left before everything's supposed to be done and the parsley can be added. So we're just going to let that cook a little bit. I do suggest you give everything a little bit of a taste as you go. You can sort of see how things are changing. I want to make sure the salt level is alright. No, it could use a little more salt. See, as you add the wine, sometimes you need to bring out the flavors that it's sort of going in with. So we'll add a little bit. I'm adding about a tablespoon more of salt here. And then a couple more grinds of pepper. Yeah, 7. And give that a little bit of a stir. Now at any point, if things don't look like the vegetables have gotten soft enough, by all means please let things have a little extra time. When you get to the stage that we're at now, there's really not a lot of opportunity for things to cook down as well. If your carrots are still hard at this point, unless you're going to sort of let this cook for the next couple of hours, it's not going to soften. So don't add your wine. I know I'm saying this a little bit too late. Don't add your wine mixture until after everything is absolutely for certain cooked. So your meat should be cooked through, all your vegetables should be soft, except for the asparagus, of course, which is cooking now. So, sorry, no take-backsies. But that's unfortunately just how it goes. So sorry that I'm completely out of it. I think I'll look up sort of a recipe for you all to follow because I'm just so out of it. I don't even know if I'll post this actually, just because it's just sort of a little bit all over the place tonight, darling. So I am sorry. Oh, so much better. Alright, darling, so things are sort of back up to the boil. We're going to go ahead now, since we're at the end, and add our parsley, and you're done. That's it, darling. So really, we've come through this whole process quite quickly. So we're going to go ahead now, and I'm purposefully scraping as much of the cutting board as possible because I want as much of that parsley oil that is left on the board to get into the meal as possible, because of course that's where the deliciousness comes from. Now you do lose a little bit of the nutritional value of the herb by adding it before things have finished cooking entirely, but it just, I feel like it adds more of the parsley flavor to your broth, and it could just be me. I could just be imagining things, darlings, but I'm almost always right. So here we are, darlings. You can see that the asparagus has gotten nice and bright green as it's finished cooking. The tomatoes have all softened nicely. All the root vegetables are soft as well. And the mushrooms have sort of, well, almost completely dissolved into the broth. There's a couple of the larger pieces still here. But this is basically, this is it, we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and put together a bowl, and that's that. And there we have it, the fully complete meal. For joining me on another wonderful episode of Cooking with you all. I just enjoy it so much. Now again, I am going to put someone else's recipe up since I was sort of so all over the place tonight, and I apologize. In future, I'll be less sober and more together. Somehow those things always seem to go hand in hand with me. I don't know why. But anyhow, darlings, it was lovely to get to cook with you all again. And if there's sort of something particular you want me to cook on this program, then by all means let me know. And I look forward to another video with you all. Ta-ta, darlings.